right, so in this section of our analysis tutorial, we're picking up with our 4 kilobase pair DNA dataset, and we're going to look at clustering as a way to label events or label sublevels within events, and then we'll feed that back into some of the database filtering operations I showed you before. So clustering is a very general tool for looking for interesting clusters of data points in a data set in some arbitrary space. So to start things off, let's look at our usual canonical log of dwell time versus maximum blockage. And there are 2 clustering operations, and I'll show you both quickly in terms of how they work. So Gaussian mixtures is quite intuitive. We look for multidimensional Gaussians in our population and try to fit that many to it. So our data set currently has 2 very obvious clusters in it, which you can see here on the statistics page. So we're going to tell it to fit 2 clusters, and we're just going to use a stability of 10, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Update event IDs. And so you can see what we've done here, or what Nanolyzer has done here, is it's automatically detected that there are these 2 clusters you told it to, and it did a Gaussian, a 2-dimensional Gaussian fit to this, and it identified all of these things as being events that we're labeling 0, and all of these things as being events that we're labeling 1. And Nanolyzer doesn't know what these mean, it's just finding these populations in your data set. You can do something very similar with HDB scan. We can update event IDs again, and we can see that it's essentially finding the same clusters, with the exception now that there's this -1 label corresponding, in this case, only to this little one lonely data point up here, which it's labeling as an outlier. HDB scan doesn't think this belongs to the main population, and that's probably right. I strongly recommend that you play around with these parameters just to get a sense of what they do. But for the time being, we'll just forge ahead. Now, there's a critical distinction here, which is that there's these 2 buttons, update event IDs and update sublevels, which is currently grayed out. And the reason for that is right now we're using 2 metadata features that have 1 level per event. These things don't apply to sublevels. If we instead select the sublevel blockage as our column, you'll see that update event IDs is grayed out and update sublevels appears as an option. So we tick this again. And now Nanolyzer is labeling sublevels within an event as opposed to the events themselves. And here it's finding a lot more outliers, as you can see. You can also add extra features. This is not limited to 2 dimensions. So let's say we use the number of levels to do this. We update sublevels. And you're going to see it's picking up more clusters, and it's not immediately intuitively obvious necessarily why these things are different until we actually tick plot and update clusters again. And you're going to see that it's now actually separating these clusters based on the number of levels that it's detecting. So whether the folding state is happening, and we have a lot more outliers now because there are several events, a small number, but several events that have a very large number of levels that HDB scan is deciding is irrelevant to this. And you can actually do this with many features. You can add as many of these metadata features as you want. Obviously, you can only plot 3 at a time, but it can do multi-dimensional fitting within this space to try to label events. But let's go back for now to our maximum blockage. And we're going to leave number of levels in here, and we're going to update event IDs. And you can see that HDB scan in this case is detecting, in addition to the outliers, 3 populations. It's detecting 1 that has a small maximum blockage and 3 levels. So these are single file events. There's no folding. These just go straight through the pore. There's a small population in orange here that has a deep max blockage, but still only 3 levels. These are events that are completely folded, that start and end in the folded state. And then up here at 4 levels, you have a deep max blockage, 4 levels. And these are events that show a partial fold. And now that we've actually labeled these things, every event in our database has been assigned one of these labels. And so we can use this combined with our database manager from before to do very sensitive filtering operations. So let's say I want to select just this subset of events. If you watched the previous video on database filtering, you'd have seen that we got at this level, we got at this subset of events by looking at either the number of levels in the event or the max blockage or some combination of that and dwell time. Now that we've labeled them, we can do this in one shot. So we go back to our data manager where we had previously defined all of our filters, and we can simply add an operation, which we're calling partial fold label, let's say. and we go to cluster ID. We say equal to, and the subset we want to filter for is the green one here, so that's 2, such that ID equals 2, add operation. And you'll note here that it doesn't like one of the characters I've used. So let's just simplify the name and call it partial, add operation. So partial appears here. Now we select that operation. We have a very simple SQL syntax query. We're going to take our full data set, partially folded events. We're going to tick back our update plot, and we're going to go to the statistics panel here and filter and make subset. And you can see now that our partially folded events appear, and they're exactly what we think they should be. These are the partially folded events, and we can see that very clearly on our 3D scatter plot by updating again. And because our full data set is covering it, we'll just go turn that off. And here's our partially folded event data set on this 3D plot, all laid out nicely for us. And so the clustering here does 2 things to recap. One, it can be used to label events based on the single entry metadata columns, or it can be used to label the sublevels within events. And I'm not going to get into what you can do with filtering on sublevel IDs just yet. That's going to be the topic of a future video. But together, these tools allow for very, very fine-grained, and in some cases entirely automated and unsupervised labeling of interesting subsets within your event for use later with the database management filter. And so this can really, really speed up analysis when you're trying to tease out interesting correlations in your data set. These clustering tools are extremely useful for doing exactly that. So in a future video, I'll take you through simple capture rate analysis, and we'll start getting into some of the more advanced filtering features that you can do once you've started to label sublevels.